Good morning. In this video, I'm going to explain uh, the theory of Logit and Probit models, and I would like to try to answer the question which model is preferred to another, whether Logit is better than Probit or vice versa. Logit and Probit models are both types of regression models which are commonly used in statistical data analysis, particularly in the field of binary classification, when the outcome variable or the response variable has two categorical categories. This means that the outcome of interest can only take on two possible values, and in most cases these models are used to predict whether or not something will happen in form of binary outcome or not. For example, a bank might want to know if a particular borrower might default on a loan or otherwise. Here, we are going to explain what Logit and Probit models are, and we will provide examples of how they can be used. At the same time, it is also important to note that we must understand the concepts of Logit and Probit models, and we must know when should they be used. These are the cumulative probability distribution function of Logit and Probit. The red line is the Logit, and the blue one is for Probit. So we start with the Logit models. As I mentioned, Logit models are a form of a statistical model which is used to predict the probability of an event occurring. They are also known as logistic regression models. Logit model is based on the logistic function which is used to model situations where there are two binary possible outcomes or categorical outcomes. The logistic function can be used to model a variety of situations, including binary dependent variables, Descartes dependent variables, and categorical data. The logit function is used to model the relationship between the predictors and the probability of the event occurring, and it produces an output on a continuous scale that ranges between 0 and 1. Logit models generally may be of two forms: multinomial logits and binary logits. Multinomial logits predict a value from multiple mutually exclusive outcomes, whereas binary logits predict either a 1 or 0 outcome from a single variable. In both cases, the model takes into account independent variables that may influence the outcome, such as borrower's credit score, income, debt to income ratio, loan amount, etc., when predicting whether the borrower would default on loan or otherwise. The model then produces an estimated probability which is compared against a predetermined threshold to determine if the predicted outcome is correct or not. The Logit model is used to model the odds of success of an event as a function of independent variable, and the following is the starting point of arriving at the logistic function used to model the probability of an event occurring. And this function can be written as follows: that is the logit I, which is the log of odd ratios, and that is equal to z, which is a linear combination of the independent variables. Remember, we don't write error term or stochastic disturbance at the end of this equation, because this is not like a multiple linear regression model. Here the dependent variable is not like yi. Here the dependent variable is a link function, so we don't write it here. When p is the probability of an event occurring and I is the odds of an event occurring, then Z is the linear combination of independent variables with coefficients. The above equation can be solved further to arrive at the following function, which can be used to determine the probability of occurrence of the events, and that is given by this function. So Logit models produces S-shaped curves such as following Logit model shaped curve, and this is the form of the Logit models S-shaped curve. When the value of Z approaches minus infinity, the value of sigma Z or P approaches 0, and as the value of Z approaches plus infinity, then the value of sigma Z or P approaches 1. So it means that in case of Logit models, the limit of the probabilities will range between 0 and 1. It cannot be greater than 1 and it can be less than 0. On the other hand, Probit models are form of statistical model used to predict the probability of an event occurring also, and these are similar to the Logit models, but they are based on the Probit function instead of the logistic function. Probit function is also called as Probit link function. In Probit model, the cumulative standard normal distribution function is used to model the relationship between the predictors and the probability of that event occurring. And the output of the Probit model also ranges from 0 to 1, like that of the Logit model. The Probit model can be represented using the following formula. When probability of y is equal to 1 given x is some function of z, where z is the linear combination of the independent variables. And remember again, in both cases, that is in Logit models and in Probit models, we don't write error term at the end of the model, because the dependent variable here is not simply a variable, but it's a link function, and that is the log of r's. So where y is the dependent variable and represents the probability that the event will occur, hence y is equal to 1 given the variables x, as z is the linear combination of these independent variables with coefficients beta naught, beta 1, beta 2 up to beta n. In the case of Logit model, we use logistic or sigmoid function instead of phi, which is cumulative standard normal function of the standard normal distribution. The parameters such as beta naught, beta 1, etc. are estimated using maximum likelihood estimation technique rather than OLS technique. And we may note that the key difference between Logit and Probit model is the sigmoid or logistic function and cumulative normal distribution function respectively. That is, in Logit models are based on logistic function or sigmoid function, whereas the Probit models are based on cumulative normal distribution function. There are some key differences between the Logit and Probit models. So when we look at these differences, then we may be in the position to say whether Logit is better than Probit or not. So following are some of the key differences between the Logit and Probit models. First, they differ from each other using different link functions. The main difference between Logit and Probit models lies in the choice of the link function used to model the relationship between the predictor variables and the probability of the event occurring. In the case of Logit model, we use the sigmoid function, while in case of Probit models, the Probit link function used is a cumulative distribution function of the standard normal distribution. Probit is also known as normit. Model assumptions. Logit and Probit models make different assumptions about the distribution of the error term. Logit model assume that the error term follows a logistic distribution, whereas Probit models assume that the error term follows a normal distribution. Usage. The literature shows that the Logit model is more widely used by researchers than the Probit models and has more extensive literature. So this is one of the main difference, that as compared to the usage of both the models, the literature shows that the Logit model is more widely used than the Probit model by the researchers. Another difference between the two models is that Logit model is more robust to outliers as it uses a logistic function, but Probit model is more sensitive to outliers. So, on this count, Logit model is a bit more preferred as compared to the use of Probit model. So, keeping in view these differences, as we see in the literature that the Logit model is more widely used than the Probit model, and secondly, uh, Logit models are less sensitive to the outliers, but they are more sensitive to the but Probit models are more sensitive to the outliers. That is why uh, Logit model are preferred to Probit model. However, this doesn't mean that we may not use Probit model. We may use both of them, and some people use both of them and then they compare the result. But in the literature, you will see that Logit model is most widely used as compared to Probit model on the basis of its sensitivity to the outliers and the basis of its usage by the researchers. And here is the picture that represents the Logit and the Probit models. As I mentioned earlier, the red colored S-shaped curve is that of the Logit model, and the blue color S-shaped curve is that of the Probit model. And in both the models, when z approaches minus infinity, the value of p reaches 0, and when the z reaches plus infinity, then the value of p or the probability reaches or approaches 1. So I hope this was helpful, and the summary or the conclusion of this presentation is that although we may use both Logit and Probit models, but as compared to the use of Probit models, Logit models are more widely used. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, kindly subscribe the channel, and don't forget to click on the bell icon, and you will get timely notification about my other videos that I'll upload for you. I thank you very much for watching this video and the channel. Kindly share this channel and various videos with your colleagues, with your friends, with your students, and in various WhatsApp groups, so that these can reach to the maximum possible number of people, and they can benefit from that. Thank you very much, and see you in another video.